I'm just going to try to do a whole bunch of things today on crop rotations and no-till. I realize almost all of you are no-tilling. If you would have been lucky enough to go with Ruth and I on some of our travels and get to Europe and see those places in the world and where there's this intensive rotation, erosion that degraded the soils, and that's a lot of the reasons that Europeans came here at one time, is because they'd screwed up their ground. So Dakota Lakes Research Farm, Potter County, Sully County should be very proud of that. It's world famous. This area is world famous. Everybody looks at the no-till percentages and go, how do you get that area up there that's all pretty much no-till? And how'd that happen is really, the first speaker this morning talked about that era when we hit that desperation thing in the 80s. That was part of it. There was a lot of people here that were really kind of having a lot of issues financially because of bad government policy that got them into a corner. And diversifying, there were some things that government did in the 80s and early 90s in terms of getting rid of cross-compliance. All you young guys can ask your grandpa or dad about what the hell I'm talking about. But we got rid of cross-compliance, and then we got freedom to farm. And those two things happened in the late 80s and 90s, so this idea of mine that we could do diverse rotations out here if we no-tilled, kind of had a way to get there because we got rid of some of the stupid government programs. And I talked in Kansas the other day and we talked about the same thing, and it was Bob Dole and Tom Daschle. Those two guys working together to get rid of some of the stupid things. So we have another majority leader in the Senate now, so maybe he can do some things for us too. So Dakota Lakes was created as an irrigation farm initially. At least one of the first board of directors is in the room. And we bought this site in 1989, but they'd actually made an offer on it in 84. So the idea started in 82. And we didn't get going until 1990. It's owned by, it's a typical rolling prairie. It's owned by farmers, both irrigation dryland people, 100% low disturbance no-till since the day we started. Never have done tillage there. That's why that poor lady got stuck with me. Production enterprise, it's unique in that we have farmer ownership instead of government ownership. Farmers have long-term goals. You think multi-generational. Universities think year to year, budget to budget, grant to grant. There's a huge difference in that. So Dakota Lakes gets to think long-term. The production enterprise that we run in between doing research, we do a lot of just getting the ground uniform to another guy to put a research project in there. The production enterprise helps to support the research. Our annual meeting's February 11. If you're not a member of Dakota Lakes and you live in Potter County or Sully County or whatever, you should be a member. If your dad was a member, that's great. You should be a member. All your brothers and sisters. That's how we keep this thing going. Annual meeting, February 11th, Casey Tibbs Rodeo Center. We're having, for the people who were board of directors members over the years, we're having a reunion in the morning at the Regional Extension Center. If you don't know much about Dakota Lakes, go to this YouTube virtual field day, and all the stuff I'm going to talk today about, you're going to see it, videos of it. You'll be able to see the soils. It's really quite good. We did this in 2020 when we had the COVID thing. So instead of having people come, we did a video. You can go to our website. There's a lot of information there, and a lot of what I'm talking about today will be on the website too. The present manager, Sam Ireland, someplace in the room, I think, unless he left. You here, Sam? Yeah, he's back there. He'll be leaving us in a couple of weeks, and they're stuck with me again until we get the new person. The First Nations, or the Native Americans here, were farmers until they had a horse. So there was farming all along the Missouri River you can go out to West Whitlock and see some of the types of places they lived. They grew corn, those kind of things. Lewis and Clark purchased corn from the Native Americans at Bismarck. So when we said we think we can grow corn, we weren't, we were serious. And if they had a crop failure, they died, so they were pretty good at it, okay? They could only start being hunter-gatherers once they had horses. This is a native vegetation on the prairie, this deep-rooted things. We're not doing that now. We're not quite matching because we're not getting deep enough. And so that's given us some of this salinity problems and things that we're having. We're doing pretty good, but we're having some issues. Ecosystem processes, water cycle, energy flow, mineral cycle, community dynamics. We want to mimic those. We want to catch and release our nutrients. We don't want to ship them out. You're a farmer, you're taking sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to get products you can sell. And I don't care what that is. Right now you're doing wheat and corn and sunflowers and beans and those things. There might be a lot of other things that we can grow. Focus on having the soil wet during the dry part of the year. Don't just worry about having it dry during the wet part of the year. We all want to get our corn in early. So we do all these stupid things so we can get our corn in early, and then we end up being dry later in the summer. Focus on having the soil cool during the hot part of the year, and that's getting to be a bigger and bigger issue. Roots don't like it much when it's too hot. So we try to keep that soil covered during that hot part of the year, and that biology that Jim talked about don't like it hot either. So that's what we got to try to do. We started out with irrigation. Before we ever moved to Pier, we had switched over to be dry land and irrigation, and I think our impact has been much greater on the dry land people. Because in reality, irrigation is something that should only be done when you really have to. But you have to use every drop of water you get free as well as you can before you ever think about irrigation. If you're getting a reduction in pH, organic matter, and fertility, we're doing a poor job of doing something with either our nutrients or water. Soil health is not a goal. Take to tell that all these people have been talking about soil health. Soil health is not a goal. It's just a consequence. It's a consequence. You do a good job managing your ecosystem, you're going to have soil health, you're going to have that biology, and you don't have to be going someplace looking for it. We've done a lot of work with infiltration. So there we got all our little infiltration things. These are putting on water anywhere from 10 to 20 inches an hour. And if we don't get runoff, then we know we're doing a good job, and we measure all the things that come off in terms of are we moving something to the water. A lot of people further east and some around here think vertical tillage is a great thing. One pass with a vertical tilling machine will cut your infiltration rate in half. You really don't want that happening here. Strip till with high disturbance, that's really hot some places. It's not the tillage that gives you the response, it's a fertilizer response, but I love this. How are you going to follow that with a planter? I mean, you better have your good driver on there if you're going to come in and make that little swoop just to get in there just right. And then you've created more weeds because you've disturbed the soil, and I'll show you that a little bit later on. And if you do this going up and down hills, and you got hills here, if you do this going up and down hills and you get a rainfall, you get that kind of thing. This was a photo I took somewhere around Redfield. And how do you fix this once you did that? So there's a lot of consequence in doing that kind of thing. I always tell people you use your no-till disc to fix that, right? No-till disc is an oxymoron. It's like political reality and military intelligence, are words that don't really go together. Where do you want your fertilizer? On corn, just have a button. Whatever. Where's your pointer? Is it in the middle?
The top.
Oh, that top one? Okay. So here's a corn seed coming out, this radical, these little roots there. will pretty much die once this corn perceives light. The seed is a dominant P source through V2, and then the roots come out above the seed. And they come over, we put our fertilizer 3 inches to the side, that runs into it, and at the same depth as the seed, right there. And everybody talks about putting it deeper. That's only when you used to do tillage and the top was dry. The roots will stay up there like that. These quit growing. So every year when we have people come and visit, I'll dig up a mature corn plant, tip it upside down. You can always find the seed. A lot of you have done that. I know Dan Forgey's done that with me. And all the roots come out as an umbrella like this and go down the macro pores. So if you're doing long-term no-till, you get much deeper rooting, but you don't need to be sticking it in the ground. So here's our old concept seeder that Jason loves to hate. We designed the backswept residue managers. That was kind of the first thing. This was way back in the early 90s. Low disturbance, what we want to do is put the fertilizer, there's 2 places there, one's got the fertilizer and one's got the seed. And that's what it looks like later on. Matt Hagney, a lot of you older people would have known Matt. Matt Hagney worked with us on making pointy closing wheels. We made one design for May West, and we did, this is another one from Yetter. Matt made what they call the Thompson wheel, because he worked with Thompson on that. We are in 20-inch rows. We use this on irrigation, and you can see that we leave our residue pretty much vertical and in place. If you chop it up and use the Calmer corn head type things, the residue blows away and washes away, and whatever, we like to leave it in place, but we can plant through 240 bushel corn stalks and plant corn again. It's all right. We try to leave the residue in place until this year, until next year's canopy's in place. So the less you have to do there, the better off you are. Fall applied nitrogen just is not the right time, normally. There's some people, here it's dry enough, you might be able to get by with it. They always talk about strip till, so this goes way back to the late 90s and early 2000s. Monsanto had a thing at Redfield where they did strip till, and it showed up to be better, but they were doing this thing. They were putting fertilizer on both as a pop-up and fall P for their strip till, but the no-till, they were doing nothing. And so we told them you got to be equivalent. So these two should be compared, and now the no-till will beat the strip till. Here they're putting on twice as much phosphorus. The one thing we've seen consistently is that we get a response to a starter or sideband nitrogen on corn and milo. And it's the most consistent thing we do. And when Sam, was that 2 years ago, Sam missed a button, which I've done too, and he planted half a field with the corn without the sideband going of nitrogen. And we went right back out with a stream bar and stream barred right over the rows and to fix it so it was uniform. But I told him, I said, that's a good thing, because all summer we'll be able to show people that the corn is different size and different color where we didn't have the sideband. And we could. And that's something that's the most consistent thing for us. And the reason is your nitrogen, if you don't put the sideband there, your nitrogen is all in the organic form, which is what you want it to be, because it's not going to get washed away. So when you plant, it's all sitting there in that residue in the organic form. If you've done tillage, it's all been released, and you don't see the same thing. But in no-till, it's all in the organic form. And what you want to do is put that fertilizer close to the seed, because nitrogen and sulfur move with the water, and the plant isn't using very much water in the spring. So there's not very much of it moving toward that root. If it has to drag it in from all the way, if you broadcast your nitrogen, it'll never get enough. So you got to have a little bit in that sideband. Doesn't have to be all. We do a lot of it where it all goes in. But if that doesn't work for you, but just some, And I think you'll see, if you do a little side by side. So here's where we did one of these things where this is end of the side to pop up and no, in over the row or in the middle of the rows. And these two are not as good, even if we put that liquid nitrogen right over top the row. Side bands. Phosphorus is a little bit different thing. Here's all the side bands. It doesn't make a lot of difference what we do with phosphorus. A little bit of starter's okay, but with mycorrhizal fungi, if you're a long-term no-till guy, we don't see a response necessarily to the phosphorus. We've got a long study, a big study. It's been going for a lot of years. Go on that YouTube video. We explain it pretty well. But we can run very low Olsen's soil test levels because our mycorrhizal populations are higher. We have treatments where we put 200 pounds of MAP on 4 times in like a 10-year period. 100 pounds 4 times in 10-year period or no extra. And these just have a little side band of phosphorus on them. And the yields are equivalent, but if we count the mycorrhizal fungi, we have 5 times as many where we haven't put any extra phosphorus on. So some of the things that people say, if you put phosphorus on or manure on or whatever, then you discourage that mycorrhizal fungi, and that's true. Okay, so we think we can get by with less phosphorus, broadcast phosphorus fertilizer, keep our phosphorus levels lower, and then we'll have less P moving to the rivers, because that's going to become a big issue one of these days. No-till is the best thing to do. Placing the fertilizer in the ground is the second best thing to do, and then managing your additions. Take a total P test when you send a soil sample in. Like if you're doing either Olsen or Bray or Malik, somebody's doing that. That's an estimate of how much is going to dissolve. What you want to, and that's what you want to do to set your fertilizer rate. But if you take a total P, like us, you're probably going to see you have about 6,000 pounds of total P to 4 feet. But it's just in this form that's hard. It's like a rock type form, hard for the plants to get. Mycorrhizal fungi help you do that. Have you ever driven through the Black Hills and seen a tree growing out of a rock? How in the hell does it do that? The answer is mycorrhizal fungi. Okay? So there's these little things that kind of neat that you can use. Nutrient management will need to become more cyclic. There's 450,000 pounds of phosphate in a railroad 80-unit train load of soybeans. And over half the soybeans in the United States go to China. Right? Are they going to send our phosphorus back? No. So we need to start thinking about those things. So we need to be more cyclic. Right now we're very linear. The proportion cycled within the system needs to be increased, and the portion exported decreased. And now if we were feeding pigs and sending to China, we'd be sending very little stuff there. So we do some starter P with the seed, other nutrients placed near the row at seeding or on the soil surface after crop canopy. We do a lot of stuff after V5 on wheat. Broadcast fertilizer before at seeding encourages weeds. So we're trying not to fertilize the weeds. Available nutrient, that's your soil test number. That's important. Moisture, that's important. And then roots, and mycorrhizal fungi are roots. So if you're trying to increase the number of roots, have moisture where you have available nutrients. Use of perennials will probably necessary in time. I'm not sure how the government's going to handle that, or you're going to handle that, but eventually we're going to have to do that if we've got these long-term goals for maintaining our soils. And I know a lot of you guys rent a lot of land. So how's your landlord going to handle that? I mean, these are big issues. Crop rotation has been a primary tool for managing agro-ecosystems forever. Diverse crop rotations help mimic natural ecosystems. They help prevent resistant biotype weeds. We have those because we weren't doing things as well as we should. And they help in terms of insect issues and also improving productivity, ecosystem services, and soil properties. And we're going to show you a lot of that today. Technological development, pesticides have allowed us to forget that. Our great-grandfathers probably, grandfathers and great-grandfathers knew how to do crop rotations better. And farmers are very good at this, actually, a lot better than scientists are. Linear input-output systems degrade the ecosystem and prove to be unstable. Becomes a mining operations. Weeds and diseases are nature's way of adding diversity to a system that lacks diversity. And the thing I want you to do is if you have a weed, don't call up somebody and ask them, what kind of herbicide do you have to control my weed? I want you to do a little bit of study first on what are that weed's habits. Same way with insects. What are its habits? What does it like to do? When does it grow? Water hemp does not grow early in the year. Kochia doesn't grow after the 1st of June. Doesn't germinate after the 1st of June or the middle of June. When the days start getting shorter, Kochia won't germinate. There's things you need to know about those weeds that can be a benefit to you. Crop rotations are both more important and more powerful than no-till. No-till is not about lack of tillage, but it's about managing the water and whatever. You can't do that once you do tillage. And you'll see in here that if I do tillage, I increase the weeds. Right? There's a lot of work that we did on that. If you're low disturbance, if you're even using a disc marker on a drill, if you remember the old disc markers on the drills, we had more weeds wherever that disc marker ran. So one time early on, I had a guy out with a little backpack sprayer and a four-wheeler spraying weeds out of the marks because I'd used a disc marker. So we went to die markers. So you can't just quit doing tillage. You have to change your rotations. You guys know this. There are a lot of places I speak, they don't want to do that. If you just take tillage out and don't do anything else, you collapse the system. So let's simplify this a bit. Cultural practices, technology, and management. If tillage is a cultural practice, if you try to replace tillage with technology, there's not enough technology there. That's why we have resistant weeds. We have to use those cultural practices better and management better to take care of the weeds. So, tillage, rotation, sanitation, competition. In nature, tillage is a catastrophic event. And this here is the biggest threat to the United States in terms of productivity of anything. If you take an uncultivated soil, it looks like this. There's a little bit of topsoil on the top. There's a little more topsoil on the bottom. But that's what it looks like. You got some hills, and it doesn't take a very big hill. And if we cultivate it short term, we pull the topsoil off of the top, start dragging it down the hill. It's called tillage erosion. NRCS does not count that. If you take this universal soil loss equation, they don't count tillage erosion in there. Not sure why. I think it's because if they did, nothing would be in compliance. And if I cultivate, and this is what it looks like, you see this all over. Not so much here, but you go down through Nebraska and across Minnesota. And if I cultivate it long term, then I start pulling the subsoil down on top of the topsoil down below. And pretty soon all we're doing is farming subsoils. This is a series of 4-foot cores taken over north of Sioux Falls. Here's the top of the hill. That's totally subsoil. Here's that first slope, top of the slope, all subsoil. Here we have the toe slope. We have subsoil on top of the topsoil. And here's the bottom, right in that bottom, that's all subsoil down to there, and there's the topsoil. Wow, that's a mess. And how do you fix that? There's some bright guy from Iowa start taking a scraper out and taking the dirt from the bottom, taking it up on top. You know, the best way is just prevent it. Tillage is to agriculture what fracking is to petroleum. Both increase the speed and extent of removable compounds in the ecosystem. So we're going to take tillage out. We're going to replace it to add more diversity with rotations. We have not used a broadcast insecticide in 18 years. We have a little bit come on our seed because we don't want it, but it's there. But we do this because we have lots of predators. If we sprayed, we'd kill the predators. One of the important things that Dakota Lakes does that nobody else does is we do long-term studies. Short-term studies is just not accurate. I'm going to show you some long-term study results today. Crop rotation allows time, and the big thing is the time, the breaks in your crop rotations. The corn bean thing is a two-crop monoculture. You go up into Canada and they do the wheat canola. It's a two-crop monoculture. Mother Nature figures that out right away. And so guys just keep dumping on more and more technology. And the companies just keep furnishing it, but we shouldn't need to do that. So proper intensity, adequate diversity. Proper intensity, use the water. And adequate diversity, not maximum diversity, just adequate. Dan Forgy and I had this discussion years ago, right? Remember that, Dan? You're growing all these different things, and I said, you know, it's adequate, Dan. You don't have to have 12 crops. And Treg is going, yeah, I remember those days. Native vegetation is the best indicator of your intensities. Most of the plant growth problem blamed on no-till are a result of inadequate diversity or improper intensity. The guys in the Corn Belt really have trouble with that. You put your water you save to work. When I lived here in the 70s, almost everybody was doing wheat summerfell. One crop of wheat every 2 years for all the young guys that don't know what the hell that is. And if they would have just started doing no-till and not changed from wheat sunflower, summerfell would be the biggest damn disaster you could think of. They had to use that water they were saving by doing no-till to do stuff like grow corn and sunflowers and those kind of things. I want to see at least 3 crop types, long intervals, and the key is the long intervals of 2 to 4 years to break weed and disease cycles. So why would we do this? Let's look at herbicides. Long-term rotation study we did out in Lyman County for 12 years. We did rotations. 14 different rotations, anywhere from 2 to 4 year rotations. At the end of 12 years, we planned a uniform crop of spring wheat on a half section of ground, and this guy come out on these 280 plots that we had and counted the weeds that come up in the spring. So we put a burn down on, planted spring wheat. He counted all the weeds, and then we sprayed the burn down. And then he came back again right before we sprayed bromoxynil for broadleaf weed control. So he counted the weed density, number of weeds per square meter in those plots. That's all they had is those 2 sprays. Where we had wheat and summer fallow for 12 years, we had 31 weeds per square yard or square meter. Where we did wheat chickpea, we had 53. Where we did a longer rotation, wheat, corn, chickpea, 13. But when we stretched it out to a 3-year break, we had only 3. So he was counting the ones that were there before we sprayed them. So all the ones that we killed with spray, he had counted before we sprayed them. And I told him that only worked if you're low disturbance no-till, not hoe drills and those kind of things. So we did a study where we rototilled areas on our farm, and then we left it no-till, and we counted the weeds again. Didn't put any more herbicide on there for 3 years. Where we tilled, half of them come up that first year. 20% were no-till. 31 came up the second year, 4 where we no-tilled, and 19, and then 3% where we had a 2-year break. Okay? So if you did corn, pea, winter wheat, and then come back to corn, you'd only have 4% left if they'd gone to seed on you. We'd get rid of them in those 2 years of break. If I just did corn, pea, or corn, sunflower, did that every other, or corn, soybean, I'd still have 32 even in no-till, and have 48 if I did till. So that's the difference. It's common for us not to spray our winter wheat. We don't have to. And I always talk about this as when I had my ought to steer. Ought to steer better than that and leave a little thing in there. But some experts propose, even some that work at SDSU, propose using tillage as a mean to address weed resistance. Well, you're just going to stir up other ones, and you're going to bury your resistant weeds. So they'll come and bother you if you disturb it again. If tillage was so good at getting rid of weeds, they should all be gone by now. Right? We've done enough tillage. Biological, does this action address the weakest point in the life cycle of an organism? Either a weed or an insect. The weakest point of an organism is before it grows. If you can keep a weed from going to seed so it's not there the next year, that's your best weed control. Right now we do a lot of programs where we spray weeds after they're up. Well, that's not the weakest point, right? It's already grown, it's already there, and that's why we're getting the resistance, is because we're trying to do everything with post-emerge herbicides. Okay, so we got to think about what we're trying to do. If we can keep it from going to seed, keep seed from being there, use clean seed, clean our combines, those kind of things. This photo is from 1993, when they had just come out with pursuit-tolerant corn. And a young guy in a meeting said, I don't have to rotate because I now have pursuit-tolerant corn, and I'm going to do corn soybean, and pursuit kills everything. And I'll just do pursuit on my corn, pursuit on my beans. And I said to him, well, you're going to have resistant weeds. I got a letter from Cyanamid saying we want a retraction because there's no proof that there's resistance to pursuit. And my boss got one of those letters, and he called me and he said, I think I know the answer, but is there any chance you'll retract? And I called the guy from Cyanamid and said, I will retract in 3 years if I don't have resistance at Dakota Lakes. And all I did is put in a trial. Leon Raggy did the trial, and with chickpeas. And I went up the hill, and there was a guy that had been using glean on his winter wheat for 10 years and had a whole bunch of kochia weed in his fence line. And I just took some of his kochia weed and shook them over top of Leon's trials. Not a problem. And later in the summer, I called this guy. I said, you want to come and look? He said, no, we have resistant weeds everywhere in the Jim River Valley, resistant to pursuit. Okay? We just got to think about what we're doing. Both sequence and interval important. An example of that is if you did, in the old days, if you did corn on corn, you got corn rootworm because the beetle would eat on your silks and lay her eggs at the base of the corn plant. That egg would go through a diapause. You'd have a larvae the next spring that would eat the corn roots if you plant corn again. If you just did beans, corn, you took care of that because you screwed up that system. Other than the insect developed the genetics that would allow the larvae to wait 2 years to diapause. So you do corn, it'd wait during the bean year and get you in the corn year. That's why we have BT corn going all over the corn belt where they do corn bean. But now that's resistant. Or in Illinois, we have females that fly from the cornfields to the soybean fields to lay their eggs. If we all put our corn into wheat stubble, we sooner or later develop a biotype where the females flew to the wheat fields to lay their eggs around Potter County. So we got to think about sequence and interval. Crops in the rotation can be antagonistic, competitive, or complementary. Antagonism means that individual crops or crop types could preclude the production of another. Mustard and canola. If you're going to grow canola, you can't have mustard. If you're going to grow mustard, you can't have canola because you don't want mustard in your canola oil. Right? Cereal rye and winter wheat. If you grow winter wheat, you don't want cereal rye around. Soybeans and sunflower are competitive. They don't hate each other. They're just both go in the same spot. Peas, chickpeas, and lentils go in the same pot. Peas and canola, corn and sorghum. They compete for that spot, but they can also be complementary where those two crop types, or those two crops complement each other. And a couple of those are soybean and canola. If you grow canola and soybean both, they have different diseases. And the canola tends to kill cyst nematodes. Corn and sorghum. Sorghum doesn't have the same insects that corn does. So they complement each other. So we grow both of those. Wheat complements corn. Simple rotations like this, winter wheat, corn, canola, corn, soybean, they're simple, but they have the same sequence and interval every time around. So they can get you in trouble. But they're simple. You don't have to explain to the hired man that you only spray atrazine on part of the wheat stubble, right? You got to be a little careful with what you're doing, right? If you have something other than a simple rotation. Rotation with perennial sequences, which we're going to be talking more about in time, are much more complex, do more for the soil, but they're harder to manage. And they'll give us more soil structure. Compound rotations where I stack two simple ones in a row, and my favorite is the bottom one there, spring wheat, winter wheat, corn, soybean, and I call this my banker or my mother-in-law rotation, or your worst nightmare, your mother-in-law is your banker. What are we doing there? We got half of our corn is behind wheat and half's behind soybeans. If you get a dry year, the corn behind the wheat's better. If you get a wet year, the corn behind the bean makes you more money. If your mother-in-law shows up in June, you take her to see the corn behind the soybeans. If she shows up in September, you take her to show her the corn behind the wheat.
Just take mine shopping.
Okay. Or you just take them shopping. Compound rotations are where you start throwing in different crop types. Some barley or oats instead of spring wheat, and you got corn and sunflower, you got all those different complex things in there. This is all in an agri-ecosystem paper that you find on our webpage. You know, you can go to our webpage and you can go from there to SDSU's variety trials and see those. You can go, all this stuff is on our webpage. So stacked rotations is one that we came up with because of the Farm Bill to begin with. When we first came here, Dean knows all this stuff. When we first came here, you had a 50% wheat base. I couldn't tell you to plant wheat something because you didn't have any corn base. Couldn't do wheat corn, and that's a stupid rotation anyway, and you couldn't figure out what to do. And what we figured out what to do once we got rid of cross compliance is we could do 2 wheats, a corn, and a sunflower, and be within our base. So that's where that wheat, corn, sunflower one that you guys all use came from. And then we got freedom to farm, which we could just do anything we wanted to. But we found out that longer break, 2 wheats, now you got a 4-year break before your next wheat. 2 corns, you got a 4-year break before your next corn. The other thing, if you think of diseases, you'd say, well, I got wheat, I got disease. Well, you get wheat, you got to have inoculum, you got to have weather, right? And you got to have the right host. So with wheat, we've got the right host. If I have wheat, that first year wheat, no matter if we do get the weather, I don't have any inoculum because it's been 4 years. So half of my acres are not going to get anything. My second half of wheat could get diseasey if I had a wet year the year before. What's the probability of getting 2 wet years in a row? At Gettysburg, not very high. So actually our disease pressures were at least less doing this. And it also allows us to use long residual herbicides like atrazine. You notice atrazine's still working. We could use that long residual herbicide in the first year of corn, come back to corn the next year, or do sorghum the first year with high rate of atrazine, do corn the next year, and we get these weed seeds out of that system pretty quick. So there's all kinds of things we can do with that. So, stacked rotations keep pest populations diverse because they're confused, mixing long and short residual herbicides. It's been a really good thing for us. But the big thing is it allows time. Get those 4-year breaks in there. So, the goal is to be consistent in both sequence and interval. Here's some where you stack the grasses and not the broadleaves, and that's probably one that we do more than anything else because 2 broadleaves from the road keep you too low in residue. So, proper water cycling, know your rainfall, know your soils. We have some of these soils. These are the promised soils. Go to Web Soil Survey. How many people know Web Soil Survey here? Everybody should. If you don't, find your NRCS person and they'll show you. Here's our north unit, which we bought in the early 2000s, is Opal and Promise soils. They're very low water holding capacity in terms of available water holding. We can grow good wheat on them. We sometimes grow good corn and stuff on them. This is our main farm. You'll notice down by the river we have Lowry soils. This is the river here. But this dry land quarter up here is not typical of what you guys farm. This would be more like down by Winter in that area. They have the Millburrows down in there. These are pretty typical for irrigated guys. So we got the West River guys pretty well covered, but we didn't have stuff like you farm, interestingly enough, but we do now. So a year ago this fall, we bought this piece of land, which is right up the hill, and that's Highmore soils. They're not quite as good as your agars. They're a little younger, but they're very similar. They developed out of glacial till instead of out of loess. Other than that, they're very similar. So we're getting going on those, so a lot of research will go up in there too, and it's about 2 miles from the farm, or 3. Take the E out of ET, try to keep your soils covered. There's no set recipe for a rotation. You guys got to all do your own. And the government program's pretty big factor there, but there's a lot of other things. So here's that rotation study we did out West River in the 30s on promise soils, not the best soils, but where we did alternate year winter wheat, 46 bushel wheat, corn, and then these X's mean that they're either an oil seed or a pulse or a fallow. 53 bushel. Here where we did the spring wheat, winter wheat, corn, and then something, 48 bushel, better than every other year. And then the best wheat, of course, is where we have the longer break. So I'm going to show you a bit of long-term stuff. Now we're going to look at structure, and we're going to look at some other things. Again, this is on the website, a lot of this information. Here's the 4 irrigated rotations we're going to look at. Corn, soybean, corn, soybean, wheat, soybean. That's 60%. We got it listed by how much high carbon and nitrogen ratio crop. So this is 50%, corn, soybean being low. This is 60%. We got a cover crop in after the wheat too. And then 75%, this is our newest one, started in 2013. It's 75%, and then we have a corn on corn. On dry land, the 3 rotations we we have is and we got rid of this one here, but the 50% we quit doing. But it's half low carbon nitrogen and half high. So it was corn, pea, wheat, soybean. And then corn, this is the three-way winter wheat, corn, broadleaf, and then this one where we do the same one you guys started with, we added an extra sorghum in there, so we got spring wheat, winter wheat, sorghum, corn, broadleaf. So we started out with wheat, corn, broadleaf, now we're wheat, sorghum, corn, broadleaf, so it's 80%. So we're going to look at fungal biomass. You know, Jim thinks that's important. So high residue rotations have slightly higher mycorrhizal fungi biomass. Dryland values are lower over here. On this side here is the dryland. Lower because it's not as productive. pH and calcium. I could spend a week on this, Danny, but I make sure Danny's awake and everybody else that's interested in pH. Here's the irrigated stuff, corn, soybean, whatever. Our pHs here are relatively high because it's irrigated. Why is that? Why is it higher? Because it's irrigated. There's lime in the river. There's a lot of lime and gypsum in your irrigation water. Not like tons, but just enough to keep you on the high side. So the dry land, here's that alternate year broadleaf rotation, that low carbon to nitrogen ratio thing. This is our lowest pH. This goes lower pH as you go down. See that? Lower pH. And here's our other rotations. Woo. Okay. Again, pH and calcium. Now this is deep sampling on the dry land, so we're going all the way down. And again, lower pHs as we go down. Almost seems upside down, but there's the two. That's that low residue dryland rotation right there. So if we're pushing too many broadleaf crops in there, that's one of the reasons your pHs are going down, at least according to us. So organic matter. This is irrigated rotations here. Corn, soybean to continuous corn, organic matter. Alternate year, this is 50%, 80%. And these are the shallow one. Again, soil organic matter. Alternate year, 75%, 80%. 20-year switchgrass. This is a 5-year switchgrass in rotation with this guy. So you get this guy plus 5 years of switchgrass, pushing organic matter up. Why is organic matter important? Aggregate size is the other thing. The bigger the aggregates, more stable your aggregates. Again, here's irrigated stuff from 50% to 100%, 50%, up to 80%. So this is Natalie Sturm's stuff. If you remember Natalie, she was a graduate student of ours a few years ago. She just finished her PhD at Washington State. So she did a thing where she came up and put all those things together that I just showed you and gave them a score. 0, 1, 2, or 3 type thing. And then added them up. So corn, soybean gets a 2. Corn on corn gets an 18 because it gives us the most stuff because it's closest to the prairie in terms of having almost all grass in it. And these other two were intermediate. If you look at the dry land, same thing. That alternate year broadleaf is a 2, and then the other guys are better. and that 80% are down here is up at 14. If you could know the only thing about a soil, what would you want to know? We've been through this before. It's organic matter. Within all texture groups, as organic matter increases from 1 to 3%, the variable water holding capacity gets higher. I think you're noticing as the more years you do a good job of no-tilling, now all of a sudden you're probably starting to produce more. Partially it's because you're better farmers and whatever, but a lot of it is your soils are kind of getting healed up a little bit if you're doing high residue rotations. And if you got land that you rent that has been cheated on some, that's not the case. It's because of this change here, partially. It took us 10 years to get to the point where we saw this the first time. We started these in 1990. In 2002, it was dry. And here's corn, pea, winter wheat, soybean, corn, pea, winter wheat. This is that alternate year thing. But the 2 years before winter wheat, in both cases, were corn and peas. So it's been 3 years. You know, you say, well, how could that be a difference? Well, it was. We had 6.4 inches that year from the time we harvested wheat till we harvested the peas. 2005, it was a wet year, 23 inches, 92 versus 57. And in 2006, again, it was dry, 60 versus 29. And you can see it in the photos, and you can see it in the aerial photos. We have the same type of thing happen in our irrigated ground. Corn, soybean does not run with the soybeans in the other one, 62 versus 78. This is a long-term, like 10-year average. 203 bushel continuous corn, 217 on corn, soybean, and the average of this corn, soybean, wheat, soybean is 235. If I take that over 5,000, people say, I can't make money doing anything but corn, soybean as I go east. I'm going to go Minnesota next week. I'm so excited. So excited to try to convince them they shouldn't be doing tillage. But if we had 5,000 acres continuous corn, you have 1 million bushel. If you got corn, soybean, 5,000 acres, you'd have 2,500 acres corn, 2,500 acres soybeans. If you did this rotation, you have 2,000 acres of corn, 2,000 acres of soybeans, and 1,000 acres of wheat. We grow more beans on 2,000 acres here than on 2,500 acres there. Isn't that interesting? Okay. So what do we end up with? I'm trading 72,500 bushels of corn for 120,000 bushels of wheat and 350 bushels of soybean. It's not even close. And we don't have all the technical costs for all the BT stuff, and we don't have as much herbicide, and we don't have as much inputs. Agriculture cannot do this alone. It needs all of society. You can't do it yourself. We have this goal of being fossil fuel neutral by 2026, which is next year. We press our own oil seeds to get oil. We're putting up solar panels. We hope that we're going to find a way to get carbon-free ammonia, like they talked about earlier today. All that stuff is something we can do here in terms of getting ourselves separated from fossil fuel. I'm not sure why farmers in South Dakota like fossil fuels so much. I can see it in Kansas. They got wells. I can see it in North Dakota. They have wells. We don't have wells. So why do we like that stuff? It's an expense for us. So ecosystem degradation is a symptom and not the cause. Indifference, greed, jealousy, selfishness, ignorance, hubris are the causes. I took this photo in the early 90s. It was in Argentina when they were doing 7 years of pastures and 7 years of agriculture. So they would graze something for 7 years, and then they would farm it for 7 years, all no-till. Diverse rotations and cover crops, like the cover crop on the left there, and no cover crop on the right. And that's what the soil looked like. So if you want to know what a healthy soil looks like, that's what a healthy soil looks like. And you have some here that look somewhat like that in places. Now look at that big earthworm. And then they outlawed the export of beef. in Argentina. And they did that because they weren't getting enough soybean production, because soybean production's how they get their taxes. They take 34% of the soybeans when they get to the port. 34% go to the government, and the rest go into the ship. And so they went to producing soybeans on soybeans on soybeans, and within about 7 years at that same place, it looked just like this. That can happen really fast. And they're warmer than we are, but they're doing soybeans on soybeans. Here's an X-ray core of some soils in South Dakota that they did. This one here is native grass. It's grown around Salem. This is conventional tillage, and this is no-till diverse rotations. Okay, this is what you're trying to emulate, that kind of pore space. That's what you're seeing there in the green. Huh? That's what I said. What you're seeing is the green is pore space. But thank you, Ruth. Now you know why I was so nervous. Anyway, if you get saline seeps, it's because you're moving water down. And the salt's going sideways. Hit your shale, what you have down there someplace, goes sideways and comes out. And what's in that saline seep is your lime and your gypsum that keeps your pH where it's supposed to be. You saw that in those things of mine where that lime was moving down further, where we had that alternate year rotation, because you don't have the organic matter to hold the water like it should. That's really what's happening. And that's the difference right there. This is our corn on corn. This is corn soybean. Look at the platiness there. See that? And this is a nice chocolate cake thing. That's right across the road, if you've been there. If you're not a member, you've never been there, you need to come, you need to become a member. Organic matter makes a difference. This is Ruth and I's daughter, they're not all grown up. But that is the root of a prairie plant. Look at the depth and how full that is. That's at the Museum of Man and Nature in Winnipeg. So, how many people remember Elvina Hart? Okay. Elvina Hart was a lady who taught here that had absolute discipline. If anybody moved, they were dead men, right? And the kids that were there when I was teaching didn't dare go home and tell their mom they got in trouble with Elvina, because they didn't want to go talk to Elvina either. So, anyway, any questions?